The new Taliban government has 17 cabinet ministers who are sanctioned by the United Nations, 17 men who now control the future of Afghanistan. Out of them, the most consequential are the Haqqanis, and now the Taliban want them removed from the US blacklist. The Taliban claim that blacklisting is a violation of the Doha Agreement, making it clear that the Pentagon's position is not acceptable. Since the Taliban's takeover of Kabul, the Haqqani Network has been making headlines. It's part of the Taliban and one of its most feared wings. The founder of the network was Jalaluddin Haqqani. In the 1980s, it was a prized asset of the CIA, the first to raise arms against the Soviets. Soon after, the Haqqani Network pledged allegiance to the Taliban. It's been blamed for many deadly attacks in Afghanistan and is a United Nations designated terror group. The current leader is Sirajuddin Haqqani, the son of Jalaluddin, and the new Home Minister of the country. The Taliban says it's a violation of the Doha Agreement, though. But what does the agreement actually say? Well, here's a quote from it. With the start of the intra-Afghan negotiations, the US will initiate an administrative review of current US sanctions and rewards list against members of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, which is not recognised by the US as a state and is known as the TB, with the goal of removing these sanctions by August the 27th, 2020. The agreement doesn't mention any individuals. More importantly, it highlights the intra-Afghan negotiations. For more than a year, the Taliban and the Afghan government were forced to sit in the same room, but the efforts were in vain. And months later, the government has fallen and the Taliban has taken over the country. For the Taliban, the international sanctions, though, pose an international dilemma. It raises issues that haven't been addressed by global regimes before. So, how will the world work with ministers who are sanctioned? Well, our correspondent Susan Tarani posed this question to a UN spokesperson, and this is what they had to say.
That was formed. Some of these members are on the UN sanctions list. So I was wondering, will the UN ultimately recognize this Taliban government, and how will that work when some of them are on the UN list and then some of them aren't?
Well, again, as I explained to your colleague, the UN doesn't engage in recognition of governments. That's an issue for member governments to do. Regarding the sanctions list, as you know, under Resolution 1267, there is a sanctions list, and it's up to the members of the Security Council and the relevant 1267 Sanctions Committee to see whether names are added or omitted or dropped from those lists. The list has changed over the years and names have been dropped, but that has to follow a procedure in the Security Council itself.
The United Nations says that the members will decide on the future of sanctions. The future of those sanctions can be decided by the United Nations Security Council. And the Taliban has only one sure ally there, and that's China. This has become a huge question, though, for America. The United States have maintained that recognising the Taliban government will be based on the Taliban's actions. This is the same regime that the United States have fought for years. They've sanctioned them, they've waged a war on terror against them, and now face a question about how they will engage with them in the future. WION correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City. So, Susan, when you asked the UN spokesperson about the sanctions there yesterday, they seemed to pass the buck on to the member governments. What do you think the Security Council will do about this?
You know, Nick, I think it's really clear that the international community, which the UN consists of, is really between a rock and a hard space right now in how to deal with the Taliban, which is kind of striking considering the fact that this is a regime that came to power almost in a sense of a coup and is now in a position where it's dictating who should be on a sanctions list and who isn't. And these countries sort of are trying to figure out whether or not how to deal with the Taliban or not. So I think the main question right now is how the international community is being perceived in Afghanistan, where it holds that it's emboldened enough to really make demands and ask not only the United States but the UN to take individuals who are in contact with Al-Qaeda based on investigations by the United Nations, based on investigations by the US, that like, for example, Sirajuddin Haqqani is continuously in contact with Al-Qaeda. I mean, that's a fact based on concluded evidence by the Security Council. And they are so emboldened that they're asking that these individuals be taken off this list. So it's yet to see what decisions they make and how these individuals will be taken off the sanctions list or not. But I think the bigger question right now and the bigger story is that just 2 days before 9/11, the Taliban in Afghanistan perceived the international community, notably the United States, in a position where it can really call on them to take these individuals off the sanctions list.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tehrani reporting live for WION, live from New York City. Well, Afghanistan's first female ambassador to the United States, Roya Rahmani, has blamed the former government for the Taliban takeover. Rahmani left her position in July. She says she's horrified by the Taliban takeover. However, she's not surprised. Our next report brings you the details.
A former Afghan envoy to Washington blames Kabul's former government for the country's Taliban takeover, accusing them of widespread corruption. That echoes sentiments from current and former U.S. officials for years. Roya Rahmani served as the country's first female ambassador to the United States, leaving her post of 3 years in July. In an interview in Washington, D.C., she said that it was mismanagement by Afghanistan's leaders that led to the Taliban to take over so quickly.
The U.S. government has indicated that they were met by surprise. I, as an Afghan, was not surprised by the fact that the Taliban took over Afghanistan the way they did. It was the leadership that was corrupt. And they handed over basically the country to the Taliban, and their actions led to that.
In particular, she expressed disappointment at Ashraf Ghani for abandoning the presidency.
That was the only thing that surprised me, in fact, that I had at least better expectation from him, not from him alone, not from his aides, but I could also see that the same way that he made all the other decisions, the same way that he outsourced the matter of the country just to his 2 aides or 3 aides, this would be the consequences.
Ghani said on Wednesday he left because he wanted to avoid bloodshed. He denied allegations he stole millions of dollars on his way out. Rahmani also warned of massive geopolitical shifts coming for Washington and its allies.
I believe that United States will be facing a new Pakistan with a different ability or leverage. The issue with the Indian Muslims, the relationship with China, with Turkey. Recently you heard, we all heard a statement by one of the Taliban spokespersons speaking about Kashmir. That was the first statement of its kind.
The Taliban have vowed to be more tolerant compared to their last time ruling Afghanistan. However, Rahmani cautioned that dark times lay ahead for women there. She points to the Taliban's decision on Tuesday to exclude women from all top government positions. Women-led protests following that announcement were cut short after Taliban gunmen fired into the air to disperse the hundreds that rallied.
I salute all the brave women of Afghanistan. It is quite risky to do what they are doing. And it's also an indication to the rest of the world that they have everything to lose at this point.
Next this morning, with less than 2 weeks to go before snap elections, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau duked it out with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. The two pivotal topics on which the Canadian leaders debated were climate change and the Canadian elections amid the pandemic. The environment is among the top issues cited by Canadians who are heading to cast their ballots on September the 20th. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Trudeau has seen his support plunge after calling for early elections, with various party leaders taking repeated jabs at the Prime Minister, further accusing him of calling an unnecessary election in the hopes of securing a majority.
In the midst of a pandemic, why did Mr. Trudeau call an election? We need to work against the fourth wave of COVID-19 pandemic, not on the election trail.
Trudeau, who called for a snap election hoping to earn his Liberal Party a ruling majority, now trails O'Toole in the polls 33.7% to 31.2%, with the margin of error. And when asked about climate change and global warming, Trudeau touted his plan to slash carbon emissions by hiking carbon tax incrementally to 170 Canadian dollars per tonne by the end of the decade.
We will reduce by 36% by 2030. That's done. We are proposing to go even further to reach 40%, and people know that they need a government that will act in a concrete and ambitious way on climate change. Unfortunately, the Conservatives want to go back to the Harper Plan and break their Paris promises.
Trudeau, the son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, swept to power in 2015, unseating the Conservatives, who'd been in office for almost a decade. But fatigue has now set in, and Trudeau finds himself behind in the polls ahead of the snap election that he himself called in the hope that his management of the COVID-19 crisis would propel him to victory. But with less than 15 days left before the election, it's still not clear whether Prime Minister Trudeau will retain his position. Shifting our focus to Japan now, where lawmaker and former communications minister Sanae Takaichi has now announced that she'll be running in the Liberal Democratic Party leadership race to succeed Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. The development comes just days following Suga's announcement of stepping down from power. A hardline nationalist and a former drummer of a heavy metal band, Takaichi has now launched her campaign to become the country's first female leader. Takaichi will go up against former Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida and other candidates in the September 29th party poll. Takaichi, who has the backing of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, is likely to base her campaign on policies to fend off China's technology threat and also on ways to strengthen the virus-ravaged economy. In a detailed news conference laying out her goals, Takaichi promised to increase financial support to tackle the economic fallout and the ongoing pandemic. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga announced his resignation last week after just a year in office, amid criticism over his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Liberal Democratic Party members will vote in the leadership election on September the 29th, and whoever wins will lead the party to the lower house election that will be held in November. Hungary is racing against time to save one of its largest lakes. Water levels in Lake Velence have hit a historic low. Tourism has been affected and the entire ecosystem faces an existential threat. With low levels of rainfall, there's little that the authorities can do. Our next report tells you more.
This is Velence, Hungary's third largest natural lake. It's home to rich diversity. Velence is also a popular tourist destination. But of late, the lake has been shrinking. Its water level has dropped to less than 80 centimeters from 180. The lake's degradation increased in the last 2 years. Now there are fears that Velence will be gone forever.
As we were walking along, I saw a man standing inside the lake with the water up to his knees, 30 meters from the shore. If the water level goes any lower than that, there will be no lake here.
Lower water levels have led to a decline in oxygen. This has affected the water quality. The entire ecosystem is at stake. Tons of fish are turning up dead, and birds are moving to different locations in search of food.
Protected bird species are not disappearing, they're just moving away. Fish die-offs are bad for birds. They eat the fish bodies because they are hungry. A lot of seagulls have died.
So how did the situation get so bad? The region has been hit by record high temperatures. Rainfall has declined by 50%.
Lake Valence is an area that dries up every 100 to 150 years. Unfortunately now, in the short term, we can only hope that autumn and winter rainfall will make a difference.
Environmentalists say that the lake will have to be refilled, but the reservoirs that once fed the lake are too polluted. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
China has suspended approval for all new online games. The move comes in a bid to curb what it sees as a gaming addiction among young people. Just last month, China banned those under the age of 18 from playing video games for more than 3 hours a week. Our next report brings you the details.
China has suspended approval for all new online games. That's according to a report in the South China Morning Post on Thursday. It's thought to be part of Beijing's bid to curb gaming addiction among young people. Citing sources with knowledge of the matter, the report said the decision was revealed at a meeting between Chinese authorities and industry giants Tencent and NetEase. Tencent declined to comment. NetEase did not immediately respond to a Reuters request for comment. China moved in August to ban under-18s from playing video games for more than 3 hours a week. It wants to curb a growing addiction to what it once described as spiritual opium. Chinese gaming and media stocks, including Tencent and NetEase, fell on Thursday, a day after authorities summoned them and other gaming firms to ensure they had implemented new rules for the sector. After the news, Tencent shares shed more than 8%, while NetEase dropped as much as 13%. The tighter gaming regulations come as China conducts a broader crackdown on a wide range of sectors. These include tech, education and property, strengthening government control after years of runaway growth.
And finally, a lyric from John Lennon and Yoko Ono's Imagine has been projected on buildings around the world to mark 50 years since the late Beatle released the album. And with that, we call it a wrap on this edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper. For global news and updates, stay tuned to WION World is One.